Everyone, welcome in. Betsperts Golf here for our first look at the BMW Championship, the second leg of the FedEx Cup playoffs, coming off of thrilling golf at the St. Jude, which I thought was very, very entertaining Sunday afternoon 4-man battle. Very, very tilting, painful watch as someone with a Spawn ticket, Spawn without Scotty, Spawn without Fleetwood. Felt pretty good Sunday afternoon, Ron, when Rose rinsed it again on 9, just like he did on Saturday. Didn't really matter to me if Tommy got over the hump or Scotty won again, because I just basically had a 1v1 Spawn Rose ticket for 33-1. Felt pretty good about it. And then hey, Rosie goes just blacked out like that sometimes, and you poured birdie after birdie in the back 9.
Yeah, I think first of all, Southwind is a very underrated course in my opinion. I think it's just a combination of elements when you factor in, the risk reward holes, the Bermuda rough, the necessity of hitting the fairway. So for me, it's always a fun watch. I know some people complain, but I think it's a really good course. And yeah, so my biggest takeaways from the weekend. So number one, I think the rise of JJ Spawn is legit. I was still, even with the U.S. Open win, I was still not a total believer, but just seeing him develop into this consistent, almost elite golfer. I know he's making a lot of long putts. I know that's probably not going to continue in the future, but I think I have a lot more confidence in him now for the Ryder Cup for sure. And then number two, as someone who's getting up there in years myself, always cool watching an older guy like Justin Rose, just battle through. And yeah, he's a guy who's kind of either all or nothing. But when he puts it together, like he can win against anybody. We saw that at the Masters. So that's just impressive to watch. And then my third one is, I think Colin Morikawa is now officially on my Ryder Cup bubble. Patrick Cantlay, I had him out last week. Cantlay finishes ahead of him. And just we're kind of seeing this where he starts off pretty strong round one, round two, he gets, he's top 5 round 2, and then he's just fading almost every single weekend. So that's not what you want to see heading into Bethpage. And I know it's different, it's match play, but yeah, I think there's a few spots here that are still kind of, at least maybe 1 or 2. And then there's some Keegan Bradley chatter about, he's kind of dropped off his performance, and interesting to see what happens with that.
It is fascinating. I cannot wait for the Ryder Cup. We feel like we've been talking about it all year, but it's, personally one of my favorite sporting event. There's just nothing like the Ryder Cup, in my opinion. So yeah, I mean, look, the Spawn thing's interesting. Spawn feels kind of like a guy that's near and dear to my heart is Russell Henley, where, for years, he's just kind of like, he's not really going to contend at some of these bigger events, bigger ballparks, stronger fields. But you get in some of these, positional golf courses, shorter, where elite accuracy and strong approach play can be rewarded. And then you just needed him to have good putting weeks, and that rarely happens. But now I feel like the entirety of the game has just been kind of leveled up a little bit. He's an elite around the green player, not something that mattered a ton at Southwind, but it's really a strong part of his game. If you look at his statistical profile, the putter's obviously been on the rise too, but that's okay. We talk about the variance in putting, but guys can improve their baseline putting performances year over year, and that can sustain itself. And we've seen that with Henley and Scotty. People, they get better, new style, new approach, new whatever. So it's, growth is not linear. It's also not stagnant. Someone's not always at their performance. And that leads into Morikawa, where it's hey, the ball striking is now he's like a poor man's Russell Henley, right? Some of the same things that he does a little bit worse than Henley all of a sudden. Finding fairways, mid to long iron play, scrambling's pretty good, but he can't seem to close, which kind of was Sunday, but now it's the weekends. Like you said, it was pretty strong Thursday, Friday performances from him, and then the weekend he's tailing off quite a bit. So, and then the Rosie thing is interesting. We touched on it. I'm not the first to say it, and I think it's interesting to point out. He was in a spot career-wise, age-wise, peer group-wise, where those guys were the majority of what went to live. The GMAC Poulter, those guys are a little bit, Westwood, a little bit later in their career, Euro, Ryder Cup, camaraderie, Sergio, and Rose very much could have been part of that group that went and left and decided he wanted to not be a part of that or dig in and still compete at the highest level. And good for him to win a playoff, to compete the Masters. Like you said, the week in, week out consistency is not there, but he's proven to himself that his best golf can win golf tournaments on the PGA Tour in the playoffs, strong 69-person field last week. So kudos to Rosie. I'll feel better about it a little bit down the road. Still a little bit sore on the Spawn ticket, but fascinating to see what happens here. Now, kudos to this field. I mean, these 50 are plugged in for next year. I thought they did a really good job covering the bubble over the weekend on the telecast. Like, we had kind of interesting dynamic where you had like Ricky and Kirk playing together. And you had Vegas. I thought they did a really good job at trying to, cover both the top of the board and like the top 50. Cause I know it might not be like the most easy thing for casuals and people might not care about it. And the casuals want to turn in and see who wins the golf tournament, but it doesn't super matter for these guys to make themselves into the top 50 for next year. Like, again, setting your schedule, knowing that you don't have to bank on, sponsor invites or anything like that, or the Aon top 5 or whatever else is going to be going on to get yourself in. You're locked in, so you can start to plan out your year. It was a big deal. I think it's a great piece of the schedule, and I thought they did a good job covering it. And I know like golf coverage can be a whipping boy at times, but I think kudos to NBC for the way they covered it, and I think it's a win for the way that the schedules and things work out for moving forward for the next year. So, all right, Caves Valley BMW Championship, top 50 in the world, or currently in the FedEx Cup standings. But very different setup from last time we were here. Again, the BMW has rotated for the last 20 or so years. Used to be an Illinois staple. They'd go to Conway Farms up in like the Lake Forest area for a while. When Medina was in the mix, I'm excited for Medina to get back in the mix. Hopefully, local course for me. Then we went over to Olympia Fields a couple years ago with a thrilling BMW. But we bounced around. Otherwise, you've been out to North Carolina. This is out in Colorado last year at Castle Pines, and now we're back at Caves Valley in the Baltimore suburbs where we were back in 2021, Ron. And it looks to be a very different setup since they didn't really like being a punching bag for birdies last time. Can you tell us about what to expect from Caves Valley and how it's going to look different than the 2021 6-hole playoff between Patrick Cantley and Bryson DeChambeau?
Oh man, I miss Castle Pines from last year. I love that course. So
Me
that's
too.
definitely, I hope, one I hope to go back to. But yeah, so last time we saw Caves Valley, BMW 2021, produced, I think it might have been the lowest scoring event in FedEx playoff history. So you had soft conditions, you have wide fairways, minimal wind, and the entire field just kind of went off, just a barrage of birdies and eagles. Like you said, Cantley and DeChambeau went to that very entertaining 6-hole playoff. Both finished 27 under par. And so, so the lack of any kind of Pinot Rough, the greens were just ultra receptive. You pretty much had, it was kind of a pure ball striking and a putting showcase. And, there are some risk reward holes, but there just wasn't much risk ending up with, obviously the scoring was so easy. And so, being aggressive with your play wasn't rewarded probably like it should have been. And so, there are a lot of comments after, with the greens and with Cantley just kind of flat out saying the hazards never really came into play. So, a lot of changes. Like you said, we got a par 70 course now instead of a 72. Don't often see, a course drop 2 shots like that. But again, par is just a number. So, but the course was also lengthened. So now we have this massive par 70 that's over 7,600 yards. So this is actually the 3rd longest course the PGA Tour will have played since 2015. So, that kind of changes a lot of things. Now, distance was already rewarded back in 2021, probably even more so now. But yeah, there's also some other changes. So other than the holes being lengthened, greens have been completely recontoured. So now we have the ability for more challenging pin positions. Kind of a sub-air system was installed under the greens. So that's one of the big complaints is some greens were slow in 2021, some were fast. And so, obviously the green bat situation is fixed. We're trying to get some consistency on the green surfaces. I'm hearing the rough is going to be 4 inches instead of 3, so rough will be thicker. Fairways were kind of in the 33-yard range on average last time. It's supposed to be more narrow this week. So just a combination of these things together, I think we're going to definitely see the course play as far as the par score goes more difficult for sure.
Yeah, so we'll share some of our stuff here from our course metric sheet. We'll look here first at the leaderboard. Very live heavy leaderboard. With you see Bryson up here, Sergio, DJ, Rom, Answer, HV3, Kokrak. It's kind of wild to see how we've shifted basically since this event. Tough to kind of look at some of the other things though. I think worth looking, but to Ron's point, I think we've some pretty extreme changes in terms of how it's played in the past. You can see though we've adjusted here on the course stats page. Par 70 at 7,600 yards. It's a very long golf course. Scoring, this is again, the rest of this is mostly set up to what we saw in the past. And again, one instance of it, and looks to play a little bit different. Some of that I think will obviously carry over. It's going to be a driver heavy golf course. We'll see how that plays out in the data here momentarily. It was easy ball striking wise, very easy to gain off the tee, to Ron's point. Grip it and rip it off the tee. No real penalty in terms of hazards. No real penalty in terms of missed fairways or anything like that, or the rough. Was pretty easy to gain, very easy to gain on approach as well. So very easy ball striking last time. Pretty much everything when you get really strong fields into the mid 20s in a relative to par score at minus 2.8. A lot of things here are going to track pretty easily. So some corollary courses, tricky again when we stretched out to this unique long, super long par 70 to find corollary courses there, but we could do so. And again, hole stats will be trickier. You're looking at the second hole, the 12th hole, jumping down to par fours. They've changed some of the distances there. Ron has the scorecard in his preview, which we can take a look at here. You can see here, second hole now going to be a 525-yard par 4, 12th hole 521-yard par 4. So you just have those two opportunities in the par 5s to take advantage of it. So yeah, it's a long par 70. This is also pretty interesting when you look strokes gained wise, how guys got it done here. And again, you got to take it with a grain of salt here, because small field, 50-man field. So, ranks relative to this field are going to be something that's a little bit different. But you look, it's weird to see a couple guys at the top. Bryson lost strokes on approach. Rory lost strokes on approach. DJ was 6th, fairly poor on approach. Burnsy, Rom, Noren, all top 10 lost on approach. Or the gain, all these guys gained pretty massively, both putting and off the tee. So be interesting to see how sticky that is. So again, we often will lean on strokes gained approaches, kind of a core metric that typically matters more than anything else. Again, courses will change and what matters will change, but you can see a handful of guys that really approach really carried them, but you can see towards the top, not necessarily something that we were leaning heavy on last time we were here, which I thought was pretty interesting to see as well. So what else do we have up here? So go back to some of the other things that you have here in terms of the course features. Some of the greens, obviously you mentioned changing closer to danger a little bit more undulation, hopefully, more consistency on the speed. How are you kind of attacking it from a big picture standpoint? We again have 4 rounds. We think they're kind of not super related to what we're going to see this week in terms of modeling or finding a statistical profile that matters.
And another thing, like we saw last week at TPC Southwind, new greens here also, so these will play firmer. That was one of the bigger things in 2021 was how soft they played. So firmer greens, I think, will add a component to making the approach game more difficult here as well. But yeah, I mean, I think it's still going to play somewhat easy, so I'm not changing much of that. I'm still going to look at easy to very easy courses this week. Um, I think it's always interesting when you look at these par 70s, and we only have two par fives this week. So these, I think it was can't remember the two holes that got changed, but they're
I
both
think 2 and
500.
12.
Yes, yes. So they're both 520, I think, in that range. So we're looking at some pretty long par fours. So I think that's always something interesting. Looking at long par 70 courses in the rabbit hole is definitely something I'm going to look at. Um, but yeah, I mean, look, these guys, I'm not going to go classifying this as, a major type course or anything. So,
Sure.
I think it's just one of those unknown weeks where, there's changes, it's going to play more difficult. You just don't know how much more difficult. So, yeah, I'm not going to get too crazy with what I look at here. Mostly, like we said, long courses, strong fields. Um, I think the small field feature we have in the rabbit hole, where you can look at, basically when you look at that filter, it's fields of 70 or less golfers. And so obviously the FedEx Cup playoffs are always, pretty much that, or they have been recently. So I think it's interesting how guys perform in those environments as well. So just a lot of little things. I'll probably add each of those to the model, individually, and kind of see what we can come up with. But yeah, I mean, I think I know Cantley. I think what it was like 15 strokes he gained total in 2021. Just just the most crazy putting performance that
Yeah.
I've seen personally. So I still think that's going to be something that is important here. I think this could very well still be a putting contest. So I think I'll probably weight putting a little more this week as well.
Yeah. Good call. Yeah. There's some stuff that obviously carries over, right? It's, to your point, like relative to par changes, right? So you might not see mid 20s, but just in general score relative to, yardage, par 70, I think we're still going to play on the easier side. So what we'll still continue to see is high driver usage. You saw, again, 2021, almost 80% driver usage. You can see still, despite that, accuracy was still higher than a PGA Tour average event as well. The good drive percentage was massive, pushing almost 90%, which I think is interesting to see here. Well, again, maybe that's different to Ron's point. If the rough has grown out a little bit more, greens and reg, again, pretty severely above tour average. And where it really stuck out, it was greens and reg from the rough. So you can see here about 12% above tour average from the rough, which is definitely going to lead to massive scores when you have a really strong field and, no one's really been, been punished whatsoever. Approach shot distribution, a lot of long irons, and that'll probably still be the case here.
Hey,
You
scroll down, and you can see the ranges, right? If you keep going to the next chart.
Yeah, right here.
Yeah, so I like this one because then these are going to be added to every course page, so you can kind of visually see the difference. And it's just once you get over 175, like it's massive. Like it's going to be long irons are going to be kind of the name of the game here this week.
Yeah, I mean, you see here, he's massive number of 200 plus comparatively, almost 40% of your approach shots coming from 200 plus. Again, shows how insane these guys are, that you have, this many approach shots from 200 plus yards and you're still, getting into the mid 20s from a winning score standpoint. It's just absolutely wild. And again, look at this, we're doubled on 250 plus approach shots. So yeah, a lot of these. And again, a lot of this data is pulled and looked at, from here. So love these additions to the core stats page here as well. So just kind of, you want to just scan, look for some of the outliers, some of the ways it might play different than the standard tour event. This is a great way to just kind of high level look into some of the details here for sure. You said putting, I think I'm with you. I'm going to look at, some bent grass stuff, just look at putting in general. I think that matters quite a bit. And you're still going to see that. I think it kind of plays itself out in the strokes gain stuff we're looking at earlier, where, it was very easy for guys to not get on approach and still just bury putts because they have a ton of distance off the tee. So yeah, big dog in the chat shouting out Rory. Makes sense. Distance is going to matter. He played well here. Last time was very competitive. I think we see that again. So let's at the quick opening odds board here. Give it a refresh since I've last updated, courtesy of our friends over at Gambly, which allows you to kind of check out a bunch of things all at once. Scotty is obviously a pretty severe favorite, anywhere between 2.25 and 250. Rory, same 750, kind of in their own tier. You can see as short as 650 in some places. And again, no one else in the teens, which is interesting to see. They very much are in their own tier here, because then you go down to Xander, Cantley, Tommy in the 22 range. Kudos to anyone that wants to jump on the Tommy train now. Incredible. I'm not going to drag him. I think you continue to put yourself in that position to get up off the mat again, to man up and stand in front of the mic is, I think, really impressive. But
his personality, man, he's got the personality to take the beatings, and he just keeps smiling. And I love that about him. But at some point, you're like, he's just become a whipping boy almost.
I know. Just you really like him, just bet him top 5, bet him top 10. He's a fantastic golfer. There's not a flaw in his game outside of things maybe that we can't measure, right? And then again, some of that is small variance as well. Being in contention and closing is a skill. Winning golf tournaments is a skill, and it's hard. So Ludwig 25, JT 25 as well. Then we jump down into bigger tier in the 30s and 35 range. Spawn, Cam Young, Hovland, Henley, Morikawa. Finally, I think properly priced, kind of where he's been playing. Fitzy, Ben Griffin, Burns, they're short of 50. But again, a lot of guys in this tournament. And again, you can have guys towards the tail end of this that come in and win. I mean, Keegan is a great example last year where Keegan finishes rounds at Southwind outside of the top 50. Things kind of fell his way. He ended up being on the number 50, heading into last year's BMW, and he went and won. Right. So, if there's a fit down the board here, don't be afraid to jump in. Obviously, these guys can, maybe not a Brian Campbell, but these guys can definitely, win and compete here with the small fields, putting it together for 4 rounds. So, have you bet anything yet? I have not bet anything yet. Oh, you're muted. Sorry. You've been waiting a little bit too into, later in the week as we get closer.
Yeah, just the unknowns with the course. And look, I've been on the Xander train for a while now, and he keeps showing glimpses that he's back, and he puts 2-3 rounds together, but it's just rough right now. And he's kind of still, I think he's even 2200. So yeah, it's a week I'm going to wait. I'm going to run the model. I think it's a course where distance is going to be a huge advantage. So yeah, Rory makes a ton of sense. But then again, what's Rory been doing these last couple of weeks? I know he's been kind of overseas, having some fun. His new home in London, spending a lot of time there. So yeah, in a bit of a slump here with the outright. So hopefully we can break out of it this week.
Yeah, the Xander thing is, it's interesting. It's a decent number in a small fields for him to be 20. Whereas, we definitely think if there's another guy in the teens, it should be him. And, we're not seeing that right now. So, but mixed bag overall, shorter term off the tee to green has been up the last 12 rounds. Ball striking is up the last 12 rounds. Putter's fallen back pretty severely to see that he's actually negative to the field over the last 50 rounds, considering his baseline has been so strong. I think that's the one thing that jumps out to this, quick little look for me on Xander. I consider him an elite putter, definitely better than a field average putter. That's not been the case over the last 50 rounds played for him. So basically, all of 2025 for him, that's not been the case. So we're not seeing the run of, even I would say the 2022, 2023 Xander, who was just not winning golf tournaments, but was just consistently in the top 5, top 10. Even that we haven't really been seeing this year. It's just been a lot more like, you see here mid-20s and stuff. So, he's a tricky one for sure. I think you're going to model him pretty well, though, depending if you go back here, if you're grabbing long par 70s, and we haven't played a lot of long par 70s this year. So you're gonna have to go with a pretty larger sample to get some of that data in here. That's probably going to bode well for Xander as we kind of hop through it. So let's look at some of this stuff. Let's go through quickly and look at a couple things before we wrap. Again, Betsperts Golf on YouTube, Betsperts Golf, wherever you listen to the podcast, subscribe. We season's wrapping up, but we will continue to be here with some shows in the off season. Ron and I won't do this on Monday mornings. We will wait. We'll come back in January for this. But Andy and I typically do Tuesday betting show, do some more of this first look type stuff. But yeah, we're not going anywhere. We got new stuff every week in the rabbit hole. I'm pretty sure we have some around the green editions coming here in a couple days, Ron. Like no sleep for new things for the bets for the rabbit hole.
Yeah. I'll just talk about this really quick. So one thing that I've kind of always probably should have put in the first install, but we just added so much initially is, every course is different with the types of shots around the green. So, obviously you have bunker, you have short grass, you have the rough. But again, there's kind of always been an unknown as far as how many shots you have from each of those areas. And so, I think adding the ability to see how a course plays from a around the green shot perspective. And then also on the flip side, looking at player data individually from around the green, how each of them perform, not only, scrambling or having success from those areas, but also how many shots they're actually hitting. So you just get a better overall picture of, I think it mostly helps on a course level, week to week, and kind of match up, if there's 70% of shots are from the rough a certain week, and you have a guy who's good from the short grass or bunkers, but not good from around the rough, you can kind of make that judgment on that player a little easier when you know that information, I think.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, we have, via rounds, but to your point, like the number of shots, depending on the course level, you can see here, just looking at around the green here in the rabbit hole, there's some decent splits for guys. Siwoo, for instance, significantly better scrambling from the rough versus short grass. Jason Day, maybe the opposite. You can see Hideki the same. Short grass spin kind of, not so hot in this field. That's pretty poor relative to a bigger sample of the tour. It might be better, but versus scrambling from the rough, he's been fantastic. So you might have instances where that really matters depending on the demand of the course that week. Fitzy's another one here. So you're looking at some certain guys that have maybe struggled at one and the other, and we're giving it some pretty flat weights across the board from an around the green standpoint. Then we're going to be able to get that data dialed in a little bit better for you. So I know people have been asking for something like that, and we'll have it for you soon. Probably maybe this week, maybe next. So it's coming for sure. So take a look for that. All right, so go some big picture stuff and do a couple things here before we wrap. Let's look here, see how long we got to go back to get a decent sample. I see 12 months. I don't think we're going to get a lot. So we're going to go filter by conditions. We can look at, let's just start with long and very long par 70s. Then we can mess around with some other stuff here. Just see what this sample looks like. Don't think it's going to be massive. Yeah, you can see pretty small, pretty much a max of 12 rounds. Most guys even less than that. So we got to go back a little bit. We'll look at the last, we'll say 2 years, jump it out a little bit. This gets a little bit bigger. I thought we'd have some good Xander Schauffele stuff. Let's see, tee to green, long par 70s. Scotty, Hovland, Xander, Morikawa, Cantley. That makes a ton of sense. Most of them outside of Scotty, less than 20 rounds. It's a little bit weak there. So Thomas Dietrich jumps into the mix. Probably a name most weren't expecting to see. Hideki, Henley, Ben Griffin, and Rory round out your top 10 there, tee to green. You can see Rory gaining most of it there off the tee. The approach game in this smaller sample has not been particularly strong. Let's see if we can get the bigger sample, but 3 years gets a little bit rich for some of these guys. I mean, Chris Gotterup is playing some pretty significantly different golf. Ben Griffin, Russell Henley, but this gets you out to a pretty sizable sample for most of these guys. Again, Scotty, Hovland, Colin, Xander, Rory jumps up higher. Cantley, Hideki remain in the top 10. So does Henley. So does Dietrich, and Fleetwood here as well. So
yeah,
first impressions on that.
Yeah, me and you will always have that disagreement. So for me, I think I think you can widen this out a little more just because. So again, these are courses that only have 2 par fives for the most part. So
Yep.
this is like to me, this is like a skill where distance does come into play, which I think, yeah, some of these guys have made gains there, but this is really testing your long iron ability. You're able to have success on these longer courses where you don't have maybe easier par fives where you've got maybe some gimme birdies. So I think this is really this is something I'm probably going to factor pretty heavily this week, just because I think this is more of a skill that you have kind of acquire over time. And so, yeah, just seeing a guy like Russell Henley, who we've kind of seen him in these tougher major setups have success, and so it's not just like the Harbor Towns of the world where he's kind of viewed as a shorter hitter, but he has the ability with that elite long iron play to kind of play on these longer, more difficult courses. And so I think he's someone that I'm going to take a closer look this week, and I think he's definitely in play for this course.
I mean, Henley won at Bay Hill this year. That's his win, right? I mean, that's a big ballpark. He's a top 5 at Pinehurst. He's got a top 5 2 years ago at Augusta National, right? So some courses that really lead into driver heavy distance courses. It's definitely not Russell Henley's profile. He is short off the tee relative to this field, especially. I'd imagine he's actually probably only longer than maybe Brian Campbell in this entire field off the tee. But his bag is deep everywhere else. So yeah. I mean, I agree with you that it's a baseline skill. I just kind of, it's just tricky in terms of going out too far for some guys. What it's gonna do is the guys that are gonna have the bigger sample that we know are stronger. It's gonna reward them. It just when you start to go out too far.
Yeah, the Goddard don't show up here.
Yeah, you're going to lose the Griffins of the world who's added significant distance. Some of those guys are just going to be harder to pop in there. But yeah, I agree. This is a great place to start for the week and kind of a pretty good core stat to model this week for sure.
Well, just really quick, go to overall approach proximity. Leave everything the same and just go to approach and just look at the 200 plus and see who's. So out of these guys, obviously longer courses, par 70s, we have tons of approaches from 200, and so Henley's not the top 10. That's a little surprised.
Yeah, I was gonna say it could be another shorty guys with Spawn and Henley again. Maybe make some sense. But yeah, Henley.
Oh, there he is.
Yep, 26. Yep. So overall, he's wedge master.
Yeah. But he's still getting it done somehow.
Yep, still getting it done. Spawn still here in the mix, very much so. Corey Connors. Bobby Mack. This bodes well for Bobby Mack. We have a decent amount in this mid-range, which doesn't bode as well for Bobby Mack, but you can see, Xander, Cantley, Rory, those guys make a ton of sense. Sanjay, this is pulling old Sanjay data, who was very much in the mix last time we were here. Some of the longer stuff has not been, or approach stuff in general has been pretty poor this year too. I thought Fitz would be up here, and he is. That makes sense to me too. Longer approach stuff has been pretty good. Let's look at par 4 scoring with this lens as well, because I think in par 70, your scoring average in the fours are going to matter quite a bit here. This has been good for Hovland, Scotty, Ludwig, Xander, Harry Hall. Could see birdie or better rate. Again, Hovland pouring him in. Absolutely fascinating and impossible to handicap right now, because Victor Hovland can go out and just show that he's still one of the best 5 players in the world, and then he can just completely feel like you lose him for a full round, no idea what happened, and it's like he wasn't even on the event for the week. So very, very frustrating, tough handicap right now for.
There's a lot of elite guys in that same boat. It feels like the same thing with Morikawa.
Yeah.
Like just even Cantlay, he has a couple good rounds and then he just kind of goes backwards, and it's just not what you want to see.
Yeah, Sam Burns probably in that mix as well. Interesting Cam Young course, considering how well Cam Young's putting and how far he hits the golf ball. So that'd be something that I might look at here this week. Dig a little.
Would you not agree? Yeah. Would you not agree he's a lock for Bethpage right now, Cam Young?
He's got to be on the team. Yeah, 1,000,000%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really think that one of the more interesting discussions is Keegan's spot. And I think he has been bailed out by other players stepping up that he doesn't have to pick himself, because I feel like he wants to play. But if there are other guys that like really are in the mix, yeah, I think I think it's a big Goddard up week. He was really a non-competitive at Southwind. I think he needs to show at a course that rewards distance, putting, strong fields. So I think it's a big Goddard up week. I think he can very much get himself into the mix. The interesting one to me is still like, people want to bury Spieth. I still think the Spieth is an interesting decision for him. But we'll see.
There's no way. There's no way.
Yeah, you don't think so? I get why someone would feel that way. I don't think that there's no way. I think that his resume right now has him looking on the outside for sure. If you were to just look at pull the name away from it. But I think this is one of those events that you like, team vibes, the crowd, he's still Jordan Spieth. He's still competitive enough where it's like he's had a decent year. He just hasn't had a good year. He hasn't been super competitive.
If he could have made it to this week and continued to show, I think that would have been huge. But I just don't think there's any. I mean, he has to be behind Morikawa and Cantlay in the mix. I just don't.
I agree. I think Cantlay's. Cantlay thing was never really a debate to me. I would have been really surprised if Cantlay would have not been on the team. He hasn't been threatening the top of the leaderboard on Sunday. He's played some pretty good golf.
Yeah.
If you're looking at anything statistically, tee to green, ball striking, still, very much a top 20 golfer in the world.
I mean, I do agree. You need to. I would be totally fine if there's at least one player who probably isn't deserving based on current form, but you go and you look at their past Ryder Cup history. I think a guy like Cantlay fits that, where you just got to look at what he's done in the past in those pressure match play situations, and you kind of rely on that, even if the guy technically doesn't really deserve to be in.
Yeah. Cantlay was a dog in the tough environment in Rome on Saturday 2 years ago. That matters. He's on the team. The Morikawa one I think is interesting. Would be very surprised if he wasn't on the team, but the recent form of golf has been pretty problematic. So it just is a matter of how big of a sample, what's going into their decision in terms of recent form, knowing that this golf tournament, this is we're still more than a month out, right? So there's a pretty big gap from when they have to make the picks to when the golf's actually played. When you're really riding form, that can be a pretty tricky thing. So sounds like the entirety of the team is going to be teeing it up at the Pro Tour, which I think is very interesting, where they're just like, hey, you guys were maybe a little bit rusty, whereas there's some bigger DP World Tour events, and a lot of the Euros were playing in those leading up to Rome, whereas a lot of the Americans were not playing competitive golf. So it'd be fascinating to see what the Pro Tour field is going to be pretty interesting, considering what we typically see there. So the guys that are just on the outside that are battling and trying to get some nice points are going to be pretty pissed that Scotty Scheffler shows up to Napa to get dialed in for the for the Ryder Cup. So that'll be fun. So yeah, par 4 stuff's going to matter. You can look at this just in general par 4s, but looking at some of the maybe not the par 70 stuff, we just look at longer par 4 scoring to get the sample a little bit bigger. I think that's going to matter quite a bit too. This is again back to 3 years, but if you want to look at very long golf course par 4s this year, it's again another proxy of looking at long approaches, which I like doing it this way more so than looking at some of the proximity ranges. I think this is an interesting way to look at some stuff too. You can see Kitayama, Goddard, Burns, those guys kind of popping in here. Birdie or better. Kitayama, Hall, Burns. Again, some maybe not Kitayama, but some pretty good baseline putting stuff. So that's interesting to see Kitayama up here. Still playing pretty good golf. Rolled into Southwind and played pretty competitively too. So yeah. Anything else you want to look at before we wrap?
I mean, it's just I'll kind of mix in a bunch of the other little filters we have, and I think we covered the main important parts. So I think looking at spike putting is Bentgrass. Forward sealing filter is amazing for this. To look at kind of who has the ability to spike on these greens. So, but yeah, there's so much you can get lost in. So, and more additions to come. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good week for, Ron's previews. Fantastic. Really important read this week. I think if you're just trying to look at old 1 year of Caves Valley. I think it's going to be a little bit different. So make sure you go to the site, betspertsgolf.com, take a look at Ron's BMW Championship preview on the site. There's a new deal on there too. We want to, again, you are watching the free shows. We appreciate it. If you want to take advantage, model yourself, kick around in the rabbit hole yourself, take advantage of the deal via Chalkboard, partner of ours, to, get a really, really cheap, just, couple months sub just to take you through, the swing season and stuff. There's some good promos out there as well. I'm sure not too hard for you to find some of our affiliate partners. If you want to get a discount for longer, go ahead and keep an eye out for that. We share a lot of those things on our feed quite often. So appreciate you hanging out with us today. Again, subscribe to the YouTube channel before you take off, and Betsperts Golf wherever you listen to podcast. Andy and I will be back tomorrow to talk a little bit more about some of our bets, maybe some of the modeling that we've done as well. Appreciate it, everyone.